Hi, this is Ian Spanier, Los Angeles-based portrait photographer. Today we're going to go through a portrait lighting scenario, something reminiscent of the what you see is what you get style. Something I love about that is that most of my learning, if you want to put it that way, has come from the natural world. And natural world is the sun. So the sun is the what you see is what you get style. And when you have your own lights that you're controlling on your own in a studio situation, you have all of the options available to you to put together the kind of lighting style that you want to put together. A lot of the notes that I make mentally have come from what I see in the natural world. So once I have my hands on some lighting equipment, I then have the opportunity to create lighting in my own style with all the controls that I want. Typically, I use strobes for most of the work that I do. Once the Westcott L120Bs came out, I realized there was an opportunity here to create natural style portraits with a continuous light where you get that what you see is what you get opportunity to work with your camera. There's nothing different about styling your lights, whether it's strobe or continuous lights. However, working with continuous lights is an easy entry point for you photographers that might be a little bit intimidated by the strobe factor. One of the beauties of this system is that you have the opportunity to use the same modifiers that you use on strobes that you're using on these LEDs. So you have complete light control through the modifications that are available. For this portrait, I wanted something with a little bit of a futuristic feel to it. So for the key light, I'm just going with the reflector on the LED, and I'm going to flag it with a couple of the flags that I can bring into space to cut the light down a little bit and really shape it to where I want to. As a fill light, I'm using a 7-foot shoot-through umbrella. This will add a little bit of information into my file that I can choose to then take away if I decide in post. I always like to have a bit of a fill light in most situations so that I have more information in my shadows so that when I get to that final image, if I want it to be a little bit darker, I have the opportunity to bring it down. If I need that information in the shadows, it's there and I'm not pulling something out where there is no information. The 8x8 copper wall option on the X-Drop Pro is fantastic. I love being able to travel with lightweight gear that allows me to fit everything in a vehicle or into a small kit so that when I'm traveling on location, I'm not bogged down by a lot of equipment. The lightweight system is super sturdy and also allows me to change backgrounds and not have to travel with, say, 5 or 6 different seamless papers, which is kind of overkill for most of the shoots that I do. Now, a lot of my work is on location, which is one of the reasons I tend to lean towards the X-Drop Pro system quite often because it is so easily portable. Today we're in a studio. However, this is the exact same type of setup that I'll do on location no matter where I am. So with the what you see is what you get situation, there's always a little bit of adjustment that you're going to do once your subject's on set. So what I'm doing here is sort of dialing in exactly where I want my light to be. I would do the same thing if it was strobe, but with the LED, you get that instant sort of gratification of seeing exactly where the light is and what you're going to get. A lot of the guesswork that sort of happens, I think, for people when it comes to the strobe is not necessarily understanding where light is going as you're shooting, but it's literally the same thing. It's all about angles. I like to sort of talk about it in terms of playing pool. You know, when you're trying to angle a ball into the hole, you're basically looking at what angle do I need to put the cue stick in order to hit the ball into that hole. Light's very much the same. So if you're thinking about the direction of this light and where the camera is in relation to that, that's how you start to determine the right place to put your light in order to get the effect that you want to go for. So I'm going to use these flags to hone this light in just a little bit. I'm cutting it off the background a little bit as well. And one of the things that works really well with flags is the ability to flare the flags so that you can control exactly where you want that light to hit and where you don't want it to hit. So I'm going to intentionally cut it off this background quite a bit so that we have a little bit more of a dramatic feel to this image. As you can see from the light on Tori, it's going to be dramatic no matter what. And that's what I'm going for, sort of that dramatic style portrait. Thanks to the Westcott Studio Link, I'm able to control each of the lights through the app. So what I'm going to do now is take my final reading before I start shooting. So I'm going to turn off the fill light for this one and I'm going to take a reading of just the key light first. Now, I always do my readings towards camera, and the reason I do that is I want the camera to be reading exactly what the light is doing. And if I read towards the light, it's not going to be accurate to the camera. Sometimes I will take a reading towards the light just to see how much power is coming out of that light, whether it's the strobe or an LED, but truly I want to know what's happening to camera. So I'll point my incident light meter at camera for those situations. So my goal was 5.6. Right now I have 5.6.6. So I can actually turn my LED down, or I can change my ISO. In this case, I'm going to bring my ISO down a little bit. So I'm going to go to, let's say, 1000 ISO, and I'm shooting at 1/500th of a second, and my reading is now 5.62. I don't mind if it's a little bit on the bright side. However, because Tori has pretty light skin, I might end up taking that down a little more. So we'll see once I shoot my frame. Now that I have the reading on my key light, I'm going to switch the key light off, and I'm going to turn the fill light on, and I'm going to take a reading of just the fill light. So same thing, I'm going to point the incident light meter to where my camera will be. Ideally, I want something like a 2-stop difference. So right now at 1000 ISO, I get about 2.5 stop difference. So we'll see how that looks. If I like it, I'll stick with it. If not, I might need to move the light closer, or maybe spread the reflector out, spread the distance between the reflector and the umbrella a bit more, just to get a little bit more spread of that light. So something I always tell people is, as much as I think a light meter is super important to understanding light, feel always will trump those numbers. So no matter what numbers I get on the incident light meter, if something feels better, maybe a 1/2 stop below or a 1/2 stop above, then I'll make those adjustments, because to me, feel is more important than numbers. Now that I have my individual readings, I'll take one more reading with both lights on. Now I do this also with strobes, more importantly with strobes, because you're not really getting the same what you see is what you get action when you work with strobe. So I really truly want to understand what both lights, or if all 3 lights or all 5 lights are doing individually. And then once they're all together, what's exactly happening. So my last reading will be just like this with both lights on. And I'm still getting 5.62, which means that my fill light is not changing my key light exposure too much. So I'm going to start there and then make the adjustments as I need. One more note that you should always make: if you're taking your reading and then ultimately you're going to be standing in front of one of those lights, you need to take that into account. So even though my fill light was coming in at, let's say, 2.5 stops difference, once I get in front of it, that's going to cut that light even more. So that might mean that at some point I might need to make a change, because my body is actually blocking some of that light. So just as you saw on the meter, my ISO was set to 1000. My shutter speed was 500 on the meter. I'm going to bring it to 400. That's very variable. You can do what you want here. So it could be a little bit above, a little bit below. It's not going to make a tremendous difference, but I have a feeling that it's going to be a little bit better at 400. And my f-stop, my aperture, is 5.6. So I'm going to take my first frame there. I know that my exposure is slightly above 5.6, but I already know that my body is going to block this fill light just a little bit. So I'm taking that all into sort of account, and then we'll see how this image looks. All right, so right where you are, just right at camera is perfect. Can you bring hands up, maybe something? Yeah. That's great. So as we look, our first frame is pretty much on target. As I mentioned, Tori's lighter skin is going to be a factor in this image. So we already know that because her skin is on the lighter side, our correct exposure might actually not be correct, because we're dealing with somebody with lighter skin. So I'm actually going to bring this exposure down a little bit. So this is where that feel trumps numbers that I was talking about. So I'm going to bring this down just to have a little bit more detail in her skin, so it's not so bright. You might look at this and say, oh, it's blown out. Now, if we did all of this without a meter, your chances of getting here take a lot longer, which is one of the main reasons I always argue that a light meter will always put you in a better position from the start. So when your client sees the first frame out of camera and it's closer to being on target, if not on target, you're only going to look better to your clients. So the options we have here to change our exposure are a few different ways. We can change the power of the lights, whether it's a strobe or an LED, it's the same thing. Or we can play with the ISO on our camera. In order to keep that same aperture that we were going for, I wanted a portrait done here at f5.6. So by changing the ISO only, this puts me in a position to stay with the aperture that I intended this portrait to be. When I talk about understanding light, part of that understanding of light comes from the ability to sort of see in f-stops. When you see in apertures in your mind, then you can predetermine what you want to do before you even walk on set. So when I had this idea in mind, I knew in my head I wanted to shoot it at a fairly open aperture, and 5.6 seemed like a good place to start. Once I saw the frame, it was exactly what I wanted as far as the distance of that background, how soft it was compared to my subject, all of those factors. And that's because I've learned enough at this point by working with a light meter to understand what an aperture will look like before I even take a camera out. So our first exposure was at ISO 1000, 1/400th of a second at 5.6. The second was at ISO 640, so I brought it down quite a bit. And you can see that the shadows got much, much heavier when we made that change. We lost a lot of our background as well. Then at ISO 800, we sort of got in the middle. Now I actually think that this is probably more accurate to Tori's skin when you see it in person. So I think 800 is really where we want to live. I'm getting that subtleness of the background that I was going for. The light is cut off on this side quite a bit, so I might open that flag up just a little bit, just to get a little bit more information back there. And we always have the option of adding in more light through a third LED if we decide we want something else going on in this image. So I'm going to open up this flag just a little bit so that I get more light onto that background. And I think what I'm actually going to do is move the flag a little bit closer to Tori so that when I open it up, we don't add too much light to the background. Everything for me with lighting is about subtlety. And it's the same when I get into Photoshop. Everything I do in Photoshop is meant to be subtle. And the things that I like about subtleness is that it's those changes that you don't even see that make the big difference. It's the ones that psychologically, when someone's looking at your image and you're not explaining it, and truthfully, I've always loved that saying about an image should not be explained, it should just speak for itself. And it's those subtle differences, I think, that make all the difference to having successful images. Okay. All right, Tori, so let's fire off quite a few frames here. So little changes I think will be good. So hands are great. I'm only shooting to about here on you, and then I'll come in closer as well. And then I'll direct you a little bit with changing angle of your face. But let's start off everything at camera to start. And I think these little things here, you can feel that little bit of light on your right eye. Yep, you feel it there? Okay, so when you're straight on and that little bit touches that eye, that's great, because that puts this little nice triangle on your eye. And then you can go to shadow if you want. Okay. Yep, that's okay. But it's always gonna be a little bit better right there and then towards the light as well. So let's do some right at camera to start, and then I'll say, okay, let's go chin to the left a little bit, okay? And then, you know, feel free, hands can come up, all that kind of stuff, it's all great. Perfect. So you'll notice that one of the really cool aspects of working with continuous lights is that you're not necessarily waiting for recycling time. You can just shoot. That said, I'm not a proponent of spray and pray. It's kind of not one of those styles of shooting that I really like, where you're just shooting in rapid succession and praying that you're going to get a good shot. You really should study your subject and take your time to get the image that you want to capture. So when I saw Tori doing certain things that I really liked, I had her hold and repeat those things, or perhaps I gave a little bit of direction in those moments. As much as I was being quiet and letting her kind of do her thing, I wanted her to get to a place, and this is where that little psychological game that happens between photographer and subject is taking place. I wanted her to get to that place where she was sort of being herself and sort of revealing something to me. And then when I saw it, I had her repeat it so that I can make sure that I captured it. So now as I'm reviewing the images, there's one thing that I sort of noticed that maybe I could do to improve the images. When I was shooting the horizontal images, I think it was fine. But once I got to the 3/4 images, I really noticed that I could use a little bit more separation from my subject from the background. So I'm going to add a third light here. And with all of what I talk about being subtle, this will be a subtle addition, and it'll be an ability to sort of add a bit more information without changing this image entirely. So as I'm adding this third light, I'm going to add the 60 watt L60 because I don't really need a ton of power. This is really meant to be just a little kiss of light, and it's just going to add to what I asked for when it came down to the styling of this image. I wanted some shiny material, so this light is gonna shine off the pants just a little bit to give that separation that I was looking for. If you want a great clue as to how to really learn how lighting is done by great masters of directors of photography and cinematographers, watch TV and movies. I mean, today, television shows today are fantastic as far as how they're photographed and how they're shot. And what you'll see a lot of times in movies, a trick that's been used for decades, which is to wet the street for night scenes. And the reason that you see that is because they want light to reflect off of that pavement. Normally it would eat that light very much so you wouldn't really get a lot of reflection. In a situation where the material that you're using has that same opportunity, because the shiny material is similar to a wet, pavement, essentially, is going to be that same effect where you get a little bit of extra, light coming out of that situation that will only help to create that whole package that you're going for. So in this case, I'm going to actually take my reading right at that light because I want to know exactly what that light's doing, not necessarily for the camera, but more to understand where it's coming from and what it's doing, where it's going. So I'm going to go for about the same amount of power. And once again, thanks to the app, I can do this all from here. I don't have to go over to the light to change it. And I've got that reading just about matching what the fill light is. And that's just a guess, but I think that's going to probably put us in the right spot as far as getting that light in there subtly. Now, if it's too much, I can easily turn it down from the app and get it to exactly where I want it to be. All right, so my guess was pretty much correct. By adding in this subtle sort of separation of light, I'm able to get a bit more information than I had back when we were at our beginning, where we didn't have a lot of information happening on that side of the frame. Really no separation of the pants from the background, which is fine. You could live with that. I actually do see that there is some information back there. This screen is not nearly as calibrated as my computer is. I also know that there's information in here that I can pull out because there is some light hitting that, and that will allow me to get there in post once we get to Photoshop. So I know that I've got some info here, and that might be something that I could add in post as well, but why add it in post if you could do it right out of camera? So going back to this with the addition of the L60B, essentially now what I'm looking for is it in the right spot? Is it where I want it to be? I'd actually like it to be a little bit more behind her so that it wraps around. As far as the power setting goes, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I can live with that power setting. Maybe I'll turn it down 10% more and just bring it around the back just so that it gets more of a quality of light like this. And when we talk about light, quality of light's super important. That's the reason that these products are so good, is that the quality of light that comes out of them allows you to really capture images the way that you want to, the way that you see it in your head before you even press the shutter button. So now that we've captured a number of images, I'd say we've kind of got our shot. I'm going to make a little color change just for fun. So normally with strobe lights, you'd have to travel with a bunch of gels to change your color temperature of your lights. You can also change color temperature in camera, but when you're trying to control individual lights, that makes it a lot more difficult. One of the beauties of the L120B is that you can control from the app the color temperature as well as the intensity of that light. So I'm going to go ahead and go for a warmer sort of sunlight feel. So I'm going to bring my color temperature down to 3700. Now my camera is still set to 5500, which is daylight Kelvin temperature. Since the L120B is going to be at 3700, I think that the fill light probably can stay where it's at, but the edge light I want to change to 3700 as well, so that we don't have white light mixing with a warm yellow light. So now these are going to match that yellow golden sort of feel. And let's take a look and see how that looks. So now that we have this option to change color, another option might be to go the complete opposite direction. So I want to do a very cooler image. If you think about what I mentioned earlier about television and movies today, how the story is actually pushed by the lighting in these shows and movies. Think about Ozark. Ozark's a great example. That bluish green tone to the entire series helps create the atmosphere of the show, and psychologically, which we talked about earlier, also gets the viewer to looking at these shows and thinking in a certain way. I was going to use the word certain light, but I won't use that pun. Basically, by changing the color temperature of our subject, we tell a different story. And that's a lot of what I talk about in what you learn from the natural world, how light changes the story that you're trying to tell that day. So I'm going to go ahead and change my color temperature on all of the lights to 6500 Kelvin. That's going to cool everything off. And then let's take a look at that and see if we need to make any other changes. Just judging from this one image out of camera, it's not cool enough. So I'm going to cool it off even more. So this is where you can bring camera into play. Once again, you don't need to break out gels to do this. You can just go ahead and use your camera to that advantage. So my camera right now is set to a white balance of 5500. Now, a lot of people shoot with auto white balance. I never recommend that. You should always color temperature control your images. It's just the same as telling people shoot RAW, don't ever shoot JPEG. It's not necessary. You want to have all those controls. When you get to the place where you're shooting manual, which is really where we all should be, you have complete control. Then you're actually making images, not just taking them. So I'm going to change my Kelvin temperature, and I'm going to go for, let's say, 3000 Kelvin temperature. I think that's going to be about the right spot. So let's see a test frame. Same thing that you just did. That's great. Quite a difference. So maybe this is a little too far. So I'm going to pull this back just a touch, and let's go to, say, 3600. Let's try that. Okay, so this is more where I was sort of wanting to land, where it has a lot of bluish tone. Now, I might change this slightly in post, but this is in the zone where I want it to be. So let's just create a story behind this. Let's say that this is a movie poster for, like, Girl with the 15th Dragon Tattoo, or whatever movie you want to put it as. So now we're creating sort of a vibe, and we're using this color temperature to help create that vibe of this image. I think I want to add a little bit of fashion change to this as well. And then let's see if there's anything else we want to change to sort of complete the package of this story. All right, so we tried a couple different jackets. I think this one works well. I'm going to shoot with and without the jacket because I'm not 100% sold on the jacket. But let's sort of look at this as our, maybe this feels like a TV movie of the week, something like that. Other than that, I think that the color temperature really works. I mean, it makes a different feel overall. So let's just get a couple frames like this. So what I was looking for here was an opportunity to sort of push my subject a little bit. I think, Tori, correct me if I'm wrong, but the experience is more on the fashion side. So some of the posing was coming off a little bit too fashionable for me. Sometimes this is going to happen. You have a subject that maybe you're pushing out of their comfort zone. Some of the times that you're working with subjects like this, you need to then direct. Your job as the photographer is being a director after all. So what I was trying to get to was a little bit more of a hero shot, like a heroine type shot. So I was thinking superhero, X-Men, Marvel movies, all those kind of directions is where I was going for. And ultimately, this is the area that I wanted to be. So now that we've gotten here, I can repeat it. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of atmosphere to this. I'm going to throw a little smoke behind her and see if that sort of sells the images better. Something that I'm always looking for in my subject's eyes is the catch light. The catch light really draws the viewer in. So often, if I don't see the catch light hit, I'm going to direct my subject's eyes to a position that might do that. The alternate would be to direct my light to hit that subject's eyes so that you get that catch light. One of the advantages to working with LEDs is you are able to see that right away. When you're working with strobe, even with the modeling light on, you may not see the catch light so apparently. So one of the beauties of this LED is that I can see exactly when that LED is reflected in her eyes and use that to my advantage. I go into pretty much all of my photo shoots with a plan. And the reason I do that is I love to enter a photo shoot with an idea of what I want to do, how I want it to look. And if it doesn't work for the client or if it doesn't work for my subject, then I have a jumping point from there to move forward. I never feel like I'm stumbling to come up with something. The other advantage of this is that it puts me in a place where once we nail that shot, I now have time to play around and do other things. So we thought we would try something different with this color temperature. Then we added some smoke, and quite honestly, it wasn't really working. And one of the things I love to say is failing is great. Failing is where you learn. So now I know that perhaps smoke in this situation, this lighting configuration that I've got going on, it just didn't work. So instead we added another light, which put a little bit more information into that background other than what we were doing earlier, where we had one really dark side to our background. So now we have more information on that background. There's still a little bit of smoke hanging around, and that probably picked up a little bit of the lights from the back, the L60 LEDs, and all said and done, it created this image that we really like. So we failed, but then we succeeded. So sometimes that happens, and it's part of the fun. Something I've been doing since the beginning of my career is keeping a notebook of the sets that I'm working on. I'll script out on my ideas beforehand and create these bird's eye views of the set, at least with what I think I'm going to do. And then I'll update if I make changes during the photo shoot. After the shoot is done, I'll print out some sample images of my favorite shots from the shoot and add it into the notebook. So I have a reference point with a visual to which I can always refer back to. There's a few advantages to doing this notebook. Aside from thinking about things before you even get on set, there are situations where perhaps I have to deal with my client or my computer froze or a light's broken and I've got to handle it. I can hand my notebook to my assistants and have them start setting up the shoot idea before I even step onto set. The other part of this that's come into play over the years is having all these images in this notebook allows me to sort of have a portfolio of images with me at all times. So if a client and I are discussing an image and perhaps their vocabulary isn't the same as mine and we're trying to figure out a solution for what they want that day, I have samples to which I can say, well, I can do it in this style or I can do it in this style, and literally show them right here what different things can look like. The other great advantage is the return clients, and we all want those return clients. It allows me to go back to those sets whenever I need to and reference back to the settings that I had, where I had my lights exactly, everything we had going on set that day so that I can repeat that shoot if I need to. So being a big fan of shooting with strobes, pushing myself outside of that comfort zone and doing more things with continuous light is something that I'm really embracing and having a good time with. The advantages to it are many of the things you saw today. We have color temperature that we can change and see the difference right away. We have what you see is what you get style of shooting, which essentially means that wherever we place our lights and where you're looking at your subject is exactly what the camera will capture. And then as well, we have the ability to really dial into something that is different than strobe. You don't have a flash. And without that flash, you have the advantage of maybe clients that are maybe sensitive to flash and don't like that flashing look. Or if you're shooting in an environment where maybe strobe is not allowed, that happens. So all of those things put you at an advantage when you're shooting with continuous lights, and it just gives you one more solution to be able to come up against the challenges that we face when we're on location, in studio, or anywhere else you're doing your portrait photography. You know, one of the things that I think a lot of photographers forget is that we do this because it's fun. We love our job, so having fun on set is part of that job. Being able to experiment and move your lights around and try different things, try new things, it only adds to the arsenal that you will then have going forward when you work on different jobs with different clients and different subject matters. So fail. I love to fail. Fail to learn. That's one of the things I preach all the time. So experimenting with these lights has really put me in a position of having opportunities to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and then have successes from the different things that I'm trying out.